So let's talk about that SEC championship game in Atlanta, Georgia. Some would call it a neutral site field game. Some would say it's definitely a home game for Georgia. But, regardless, 3:30 CBS. Well, actually, it was 4 o'clock. And, Bama got the win overall. What are your thoughts, man?
So this game went kind of how I thought it would, minus, which team actually won the game. I figured that it would be a, back and forth, really good defensive affair with both offenses making plays when they needed to. And for the most part, that's exactly what happened in the game. In the end, Alabama just pulled it out. They actually took the lead. Was it in the first quarter? No, it was in the second quarter. They took the lead and just they never looked back.
Yeah. I agree, man. Georgia came out, they scored. Alabama couldn't really get anything going to start the game, at least. And I kind of looked at that. I was like, oh man, Alabama better correct it, and they did. Something that Alabama did, and I didn't notice this until I started kind of looking into the game, is they won the rushing game, 114 total to 78. And a lot of times when it comes down to these games, especially in the SEC, it's whoever runs the ball the best or the most efficient ends up winning the game. Now, the reason why I want to point out most efficient is because both teams were actually very terrible when it came to running efficiency. Alabama run the ball for 41 times for 114 yards. That's only 2.8 an average.
Yeah.
That's terrible. That's really bad.
And then Georgia ran 31 times for 78 yards, which was even worse at 2.5 yards a carry. So
exactly right. So both teams really didn't have a great rushing attack, but I think that's a credit to just how good these fronts are for both teams. Alabama played not so good. In fact, suspect against Auburn. But what's crazy is the last time they won the SEC championship, they went into that game coming off an overtime thriller against Auburn in 2021. It's crazy how history can find a way to repeat itself, and that's exactly what happened. And as a Georgia fan, you wanted the best, you got the best. That was the matchup that's been kind of boiling all season long. And we'll talk about it later. It's just crazy as a Georgia fan to go from number one to where they are now, and it really not be that you got shut out or blown out. I mean, this was a really good game. I mean, all the way to the fourth quarter. You were waiting like, Georgia, when are you coming back? Like, I know you're about to open up. And they did in the fourth quarter. They did what they had to do to get back in that ball game. But two things that really cost them in this game. That missed field goal in the first half.
Yes.
And Jalen Milroe icing the game. That's what it boiled down to.
Yeah, that and the penalties. Yeah. Georgia had, let's see, let me look at it. Georgia had 5 penalties for 56 yards. Bama had 3 for 36. And when you look at that, you're like, that's not that big of a difference. 20 yards worth of penalties is a huge difference in a game.
Yeah.
So, but you're 100% correct. Jalen Milroe, he on that last possession there, he cut back against the grain, broke through 3 defenders, and ended up picking up that first down. And as soon as that happened, I looked at my wife. I said, "Well, that's the ball game right there. Bama just won it."
Yeah.
And one thing that I want to mention is, I heard earlier this week there was it was a random person called into the Eric Ainge show and said, so would you say that, especially if Kirby wins this weekend, has he surpassed Nick Saban? Absolutely not. For one thing, Saban has done it for so much longer. But also, when you look at the head-to-head matchups, before the game yesterday, Kirby was 1-4, I believe, against Saban. Now it's 1-5, and that one game just so happened to be the national championship game 2 years ago. So, I mean, Kirby still has his struggles against Saban, just like everybody does. I mean, Saban just proved once again that he is still that top dog in the SEC, and not just the SEC, but the entire country when it comes to being a head coach.
I hate that conversation. I hate that question. I mean, how can somebody pass somebody when they're both still coaching, and one clearly has 3 times as many natties at one school? Like,
And not to mention that Nick Saban has been a head coach this current time for twice as long, if not longer than that, than Kirby has. I mean,
That's what I'm
there's
saying.
no way that Kirby can pass Saban right now.
Yeah,
Now, in the future, maybe after Saban retires, depending on what Kirby does, absolutely, there's a chance for it. But
right.
Nick Saban has set that bar so high, it's going to be very hard to reach that.
Well, people were talking like as if as if Nick Saban's done. Like the man's not done, and Kirby. And I don't want to sound like I'm crapping on Kirby. There's no other coach that's done what he's done at Georgia, and that's winning 29 straight. Now, unfortunately, that came to a halt against Alabama. That's kind of their kryptonite. But that doesn't take away from what Kirby's done. And I think Kirby has the potential to be as good as Nick Saban. But that's going to take some time. That's not something that just happens over one season or one off season. Even if they were to three-peat, yes, that's something Nick Saban's never done. But for me to say, okay, yeah, he's surpassed. No, that's not something that just happens from one season to the next. That's going to be a tenure. That's going to be a career, type of conversation when you talk about that down the road. That's nothing that really needs to be brought up now. But look, another thing that I want to bring up about this game, Alabama capitalized on the opportunities. They played a clean ball game, and how rare is it to see Georgia, lose the turnover battle? And I know it was only by one, but that fumble at like the 15, the 10-yard line was so costly to Georgia. And it's something that you don't see them do. I mean, it was almost like a mental type of fumble. It was like somebody, I don't know, it was like a trick misdirection play where it almost kind of looked like a reverse type of vibe. And, Carson Beck went to hand the ball off, and the dude just never even went, grabbed it. I don't know if that was supposed to be a pitch or what, but regardless.
I was going to say, the way that it looked to me is, it was supposed to be a handoff on an end around.
Yeah.
And at the last second, Carson Beck realized that, I think it was a Bale that he was trying to hand it off to, realized that he was a little bit further away than he needed to be and just tried tossing it. But instead of tossing it to him, just kind of tossed it up in the air. Neither one of them were expecting the other to do what they did. And in fact, Carson Beck never even knew that the ball was on the ground.
Bro turned around and looked around in disbelief. I mean, he had no idea that it happened. But the timing of that, Alabama taking that, capitalizing on it, there was other things that happened. There was some 3rd and 1s that got stuffed up at the line that you just kind of thought that might be the statement in the game. Overall, Georgia still came back. Like, they never folded. And, this game right here, and I know we're a Vol Fanatics / SEC type of show, I'm in full belief that we might have just watched the national championship yesterday.
I agree. I believe this was the national championship right here. In my opinion, these are the 2 best teams in the country, and we'll get more in depth into this whenever we do a playoff reaction later. But I believe these are the 2 best teams in the country that just played. So I'm with you. I think we just watched the national championship right here.
What are your thoughts on Jalen Milroe and the growth that man has had since week 2 to week 14 now? What are your thoughts of that kid?
Jalen Milroe, if he had been playing at this level that he is now at the beginning of the season, would win the Heisman Trophy this year, in my opinion. Just the amount of growth that he has had from, I'll go back to week 1. I know he played well against MTSU in week 1, but you mentioned week 2, that Texas game where he did struggle. The growth that he had from that game to the Georgia game yesterday, it's incredible. Just a fantastic job that the coaches did, being able to coach around him and show him, what some of his strengths and weaknesses are. And credit to Jalen for realizing what some of those strengths and weaknesses are and capitalizing on those strengths during the season to get to the point where he is right now. I mean, I truly believe if he had played at this level the entire year, he'd be in New York and hoisting that Heisman Trophy.
What a lot of people don't understand, especially when it comes to the selection committee, and it got brought up over and over, is, everybody was saying this is the same Alabama team that lost to Texas in week 2. That is the same. And I'm like, no, that's not the same Bama team that lost to Texas in week 2.
Oh, absolutely.
This team has grown insurmountably. Jalen Milroe, I'm not even going to say he struggled as much in week 2, as much as he just made some bad decisions in week 2 against Texas. And because of those bad decisions, because of those mental mistakes, the offensive coordinator then really couldn't trust Jalen Milroe in the next few games. I mean, he got sat. He never even played in week 3 against
USF.
Southern Florida. Thank you. USF. And now we have our agreements on why that happened. Regardless, Jalen Milroe got a little bit smarter. Doug got really dirty in the film room. And now he's gained his team's trust back, which I don't know if he really ever lost that within the team. But most importantly, he gained the trust back in the coaches. And now you're seeing a kid that's going out there making plays with his legs and his arm. And not only are Bama winning games, they're actually winning games because of Jalen Milroe. Something that we wasn't saying at the beginning of the year.
We said at the beginning of the year, at least I know I did. I'm not going to speak for you, but right. I said at the beginning of the year, the only way Alabama was going to have success this year is if they went back to the team that they were back at the beginning of Nick Saban's coaching tenure, when you had Derrick Henry, you had Mark Ingram, you had Trent Richardson, you had those big studs at running back. You were expecting Alabama to just pound the ball this year, focus on that running game. To an extent, they did, but it was with Jalen Milroe in that running game. But as soon as that passing game came around, and I believe it was the Tennessee game that I first said it, or maybe it was a week or two before that. When the passing game came around, I said I'm going to throw myself a little bit of a bone. I said if we see this team for the rest of the season, Alabama is going to be scary at the end of the year.
Yeah, it's a lot reminiscent to like Jalen Hurts' first year, his freshman year at Alabama, when they could start making some play calls where it becomes 11 on 11, not 10 versus 11. When they incorporate Jalen Milroe into the game plan and running the ball and letting him make the decisions on the fly, whether it's a bootleg or a read option or whatever, that's when Alabama's offense becomes that much more dangerous. And just to see the mentality, like of Jalen Milroe, man, something clicked in the second half of that Tennessee game, unlike any other click I've ever seen in my life, where this team just got it. I don't know what it was, but they got it. They came back, beat Tennessee by 14. And yeah, they've had some close games. Don't get me wrong, but you're going to have close games along the way, especially when you're playing in the best conference in college football and when you're playing in one of the most historic rivalries and in-state rivalries, mind you, against Auburn. It's Auburn, no matter how bad they are, is always going to give their best shot against Alabama. But Alabama, if they have proven that if they can just get through that game with a win, they have every ability and opportunity to win the national championship. And I think we're seeing that. Now, let's turn this thing over to Georgia.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's talk about Georgia a little bit.
Let's talk about Georgia. This game wasn't a terrible game by any means. You lost by 3 to the second best team in the SEC, which is now the first best. I grant you that. But, you coming in, you almost think, especially in years past, if you're undefeated, get to the SEC championship, you're almost guaranteed in, right? But this year is a little bit different. Circumstances are a little bit crazier in the sense of we've not had that chaos moment that the playoff kind of takes care of itself, right? So they go in, I don't know, Carson Beck had a decent game, man. He was 21 of 29, 243 yards. He didn't have a touchdown or interception. I get that. But that's where Kendall Milton kind of stepped up in the red zone and had 2 touchdowns rushing the ball. They did have that very costly fumble. But overall, as a team, man, they didn't play bad. In fact, their defense showed why they were, one of the best in the country. And their offense found a way even when Alabama seemed to have their number for 3/4 of that football game.
Absolutely. But the one thing that I look at is, you see a couple of players on Alabama's side that, they had a few more yards than everybody else. Like you've got Alabama receiving numbers. You had Isaiah Bond with 79. Then the next closest was Jam Miller and Jermaine Burton, both with 28. So you had a couple of guys on Alabama's side and, running the ball. Roydell Williams, 64 yards. Next closest was Milroe with 29. So you've got a couple of guys that look like they stepped up a little bit more. And I know that Georgia all year long has been a, well-rounded team. Everybody is going to step up. But each game you have had one player that just kind of stepped up and took over a little bit. You don't see that for Georgia in this game. Running the ball, you had Kendall Milton with 42 yards, Dejon Edwards with 38. So, pretty much even right there. You had Brock Bowers was your leading receiver. He had 53 yards. You did have Arian Smith with a 51-yard grab.
Yeah, I was going to say he had that one long grab.
that was insane. But Lad McConkey, 38. Rosemary Jack Saint, 30. Dominic Lovett, 23. You didn't have just this one standout guy that said, I'm going to step out. I'm going to, take over this game. I'm going to be this playmaker that this team needs in this game. And credit to Alabama for that. They held each of these guys in check. But Georgia has relied on at least one guy kind of stepping up and stepping out in a game, and you didn't have that in that game yesterday. You just had a bunch of guys that did their job, but nobody kind of went over the top there to finish getting that job done.
Which is kind of crazy to see because you've seen them rest their players against Georgia Tech in hopes that they would be fully healthy for this game. Now, we'll continue this conversation, but we got some people fired up in the chat. We got Robert, Sean, thank y'all for tuning in. Thank y'all for commenting. Robert came in and said, hey, guys, happy Sunday. What's up, Robert? How you doing? And he said, heck of a SEC championship game. Hard to believe that the Dogs are not going to the playoffs. Got to give it to Bama. They did it. Look, we're going to talk about the CFP in the second half of the show. We'll get to that. Trust me, because Sean even mentioned that he's going to go out on a limb and think that Bama and Texas are going to rematch in the national championship game. He thinks it's going to be a shootout between the two teams. Now, we're not going to even predict the CFP today. We're just going to talk about the reaction of who they've chosen, and that kind of is a leaker, which everybody knows. I mean, everybody that follows the sport knows exactly who made it. But we're gonna comment on it later. Robert agrees with Sean. But I appreciate you guys tuning in. Y'all stay active in the chat. We appreciate you guys. But yeah, Georgia, man, it's very surprising not seeing that takeover guy. I mean, to be honest with you, I've never seen a better tackling performance from both teams. As soon as somebody got the ball, or even if a running back got a little bit of room, they got him on the ground, whoever it was. And that's something that you don't really see. Usually there's a blown assignment or something like that, but really didn't happen too often. And even if somebody did catch the ball in space, the defense would always make a great open field tackle, and that's on both sides of the ball. And that's why I
credit that to coaching.
Oh yeah. Well, you had the two best coaches in the league, going off against each other in the SEC championship game. I hate to make it sound like I'm a homer. I don't like either one of these teams. So please, by all means, I'm not sitting here, glorifying Georgia or Alabama. I'm just saying, if we're being realist, man, I think somebody said it today in the committee, the show or whatever. I think the SEC's won 14 of the last 17 national championships. And that's not just with one team. That's not with two teams. That's with Florida, LSU, Georgia, Alabama. I mean, look, there's a reason why the SEC has, I guess if you want to call it bias, but it's not even bias. It's just facts, man. National championship contenders are born out of the SEC. And it wouldn't shock me at all if Alabama is the second team to be the number 4 seed and end up winning it all. It wouldn't shock me at all. But Georgia, man, as a fan, all the discussions last night leading into this morning, and I think most Georgia fans that I'm following on TikTok just knew that they weren't going to be in the Final Four. And I was kind of in disagreement.